Other than that, we also looked into how people interacted during this time. And this actually didn't show any surprising findings, or I would say very few findings were interesting. So overall, we saw that the main engagement metrics that we looked at, so bounce rate, average time on site, number of pages they looked at, were pretty much the same in 2020 and 2021. The only thing that I would highlight here is the financial services sector experiencing a drop in the engagement for a minute, for over a minute, actually, on average. But overall, people interacted with content online in the same way as before. Now, we also looked at technical SEO, and we collected a lot of site audit stats. The reason we did that is because we all know, I know that we all know the importance of Google being able to crawl your pages and your sites properly, so it can index and rank your pages. We also know that not every technical issue impacts rankings in the same way, but we wanted to look what the state of the websites we reviewed is, and that is almost 250,000 domains and over 300 million pages that we crawled. So we wanted to find what the state was in 2021 on that front. What we found is we grouped the domains based on the number of pages they had. So we created 4 groups, those smaller ones with less than 100 pages up to over 10,000 pages each. And we found that pretty much the average number of issues per page was consistent. So none of them went beyond 15 issues per page. And then the average number of errors, which in our tool is just problems of potentially lower significance that hinder your performance potentially less than issues, which are more critical, was also increasing as the volume, the size of the domain was increasing. But again, that one never went over an average of 1 error per page. We looked at structured data because this is also an important factor in helping Google understand what your content is about, but also displaying rich snippets in search for you. And we found that, perhaps not surprisingly, that smaller domains were considerably less likely to have implemented structured data. In fact, 13% fewer had done so compared to the larger domains, which could be an indication that there's either a lack of knowledge or capacity in-house to implement it, but also there may be a matter of relevance to how relevant this is to smaller sites in some cases or some sectors. We then looked at the Google algorithm and we used SEMrush sensor to essentially understand how volatile search was in 2021 versus 2020. So what we found is that what this means is that basically every other day in 2021, the level of volatility of rank volatility was either high or very high on our systems. This means that on a scale of 1 to 10, every other day was marked as being above 5 in terms of volatility, which is a big increase from 2020, which was, I think it was around 34%. So that's a big increase. But then what we also wanted to look at was the standard deviation that pretty much tells us how extreme volatility is above or below the average. And there we actually found that the standard deviation was lower in 2021, which means that the deviations from the established, or say the new established average in 2021 were not as extreme as those experienced in 2020. And then here we've broken down volatility levels by sector. So these are all the sectors and industries that we can monitor in SEMrush sensor separately. And what we saw was that the levels of volatility varied greatly between industries. We saw that books and leisure, travel, and real estate were the most volatile sectors, whereas at the same time, pets and animals, autos and vehicles and news were the least volatile. The important thing here is to highlight just how extreme those changes, those gaps were. So, for example, for books and literature, there was almost 62% year-over-year increase in volatility in 2021. For news, which was one of the lower volatility ones, the increase was only like 3.5%. So we're talking about major differences there year-over-year. And we also looked at core updates in 2021. In the graph, we've taken updates starting towards the end of 2018 with the Medic update, and then the core updates up until the point we put the report together. So July 2021 was the last core update by that time. And what we saw was that the average volatility levels starting towards the end of 2020 and continuing through 2021 is that they were all less impactful in terms of rank volatility compared to those in 2020. You can see in the graph how much more powerful were in 2020. And in any case, they never went beyond 50%, whereas in 2020, they were consistently above 50%. I can take a guess, and I can say, because people always or tend to ask me like, okay, so does this mean that they're not strong anymore? They're not as impactful, but I think the explanation also needs to take into account that we have core updates now for over 3 years. I think going to 4. And at that time, it was a new capability. It was a new algorithmic way that Google could change the SERPs and what it ranks. 4 years down the line, there's been a lot of filtering done in the SERPs, and also the website owners hopefully have also been steering towards the right things. So maybe there's less changes to be done there. That's also just a theory, so take it with a grain of salt. And also, I'm very looking forward to seeing what happens with things like Mum moving forward. So it doesn't mean that this picture will remain the same moving forward. In terms of state of SERP features, so we know SERP features are very important. So we looked at the prevalence of them throughout 2021 on both mobile and desktop. We found that winners, so SERP features that were displayed more frequently in 2021, where people also asked FAQs, images, and videos, whereas losers surprisingly included ads, or maybe not surprisingly for some, featured snippets and the knowledge panel. But in terms of the average display levels, you can see here that like dominant features involve people also ask for images, knowledge panel, FAQs. So these are all things that are engagement points for Google users, and their prevalence in the SERPs potentially shows how Google is geared towards creating a product that engages users more on itself versus sending it away to other entities and sites. Last but not least, everyone's favorite, title rewrites. There's been a lot of talk around that, especially last year. So we looked into that. I'm sure that many people will not be thrilled to know that what we found is that in 2021, up to October, November time, Google was ignoring title tags over 6 out of 10 times. So this was the state at the time that we reviewed it. And finally, I just want to draw some conclusions. So what did we learn? The report, obviously, that you can all find on the summer site, downloaded. It's over 140 pages, I think. So it's humongous. It involves much more data, and it breaks it down into more like local SEO, e-commerce. You can find a lot of data there. But what we learned overall, I think what we saw was a clear trend after the rollout of the vaccination to the mass population around the world, to search somewhat returning to pre-pandemic levels, but not necessarily getting there. We cannot know whether this will happen, or as I said at the start, if the new normal is very different to the old normal, if that's the thing. But also in terms of technical, local, we saw the trends, but I think the volatility and the changes happening both in user behaviors and in how Google approaches SERPs, I think it means that right now, as much as we would like, no one can be certain what this will look like in 6 months or next year. This report might look very different next year. So the only solid advice, I guess, is that right now forecasting or budgeting for people in SEO, in search, may be a bit out of the window if they did it last year, for example. But what is still solid advice is focus on the right things, focus on implementing the right fixes, the right content, and monitoring the situation and the trends in the SERPs very closely, because these are changing and evolving all the time. And I don't think you can go wrong with that approach. So that has been me. Thank you all very much.
Thank you very much, Erica. That was a lot of information, a lot of data points, but I think what was most helpful were the conclusions behind those data points that kind of show us where we were, where we are, and although maybe forecasting may be a little bit complicated and a bit out the window, maybe help us look a little bit forward. We're going to take another brief break, but when we come back, we're going to touch upon a topic that we haven't talked upon today that I think, Claudio, you're going to like in particular.
I love it.
So stay right there, stay tuned, and we'll be right back. And we're right back. So to keep going on with this SEO Day event, we'd like to present our 7th talk of the day, where we're going to be discussing how to take internal linking optimization to the next level. And for that, and to teach us, we have Kevin Indig, Director of SEO at Shopify. He's been in the SEO industry for over 10 years, and he's been Head of Technical SEO at Atlassian, driving SEO for tools such as Trello and Jira. Kevin, are you there? Can you hear us?
Yes.
How are you?
I am well. Thanks for the introduction. How are you?
No, we're doing great over here. We're very excited to listen to your talk.
Yep.
Yeah, appreciate it.
Yeah, so the virtual stage is all yours, Kevin.
Awesome. Cool. Yeah, let's dive right in. I brought a lot of information, a lot of use cases, a lot of tutorials. So you already introduced me, so I'm not going to waste a lot of time on that. But as you already mentioned, my topic today is internal linking, something that I'm really passionate about, that I think is very important for SEO in general. In fact, I would go so far to say that internal linking is one of the most powerful ranking signals in general that are out there. So there's a couple of reasons for that. One of them is that it's very scalable. We can roll this out across the site. It scales and grows with the site. So actually, the larger a site is, the more impactful internal linking can be. The second reason is that it's 100% in your control. You can, when it comes to things like titles, we just recently heard that Google can rewrite them. When it comes to things like backlinks, you're dependent on a different person. But internal linking is something that you can influence and change across your site. And lastly, and this is very underrated and underspoken about, internal linking is very testable. You can change internal linking on a subset of your pages and measure the effects. So it's something that we can iterate our way towards success with. One quick case study that I'm going to bring, that I brought here, that I'm going to bring up across the whole presentation over and over again, is a case study from Atlassian. So I'm right now on Shopify. A couple years ago, I worked at Atlassian, ran SEO there, and I was part of building the Atlassian marketplace, where you can, where you have whole businesses that create apps and for different Atlassian products like Jira, like Confluence, Bitbucket, and so on. And I'm going to present a method for internal linking that helped us to grow traffic, organic traffic specifically, 60% over 18 months, which for a business like Atlassian is very, very significant. And I'm going to show how we did it, and how you can replicate the results yourself. Before we jump in, though, and this is really important to understand to replicate these results, is that there is a huge mistake that people make over and over when it comes to internal linking, and I'm pretty passionate about this. Let's take a step back. Typically when people optimize internal linking, what they do is they crawl their site, they run a PageRank calculation, and that's pretty much it, right? They get an understanding of, these are the most important pages by PageRank, by internal PageRank, that is. Now we're gonna make some optimization, and that's often, first of all, it's very incomplete, and often it's very arbitrary, right? There's a lot of personal opinion mixed into the recipe, and that's something you want to actually get rid of as much as possible. So an example, when you run your own PageRank calculation, and again, this is a screenshot on the right from Ahrefs, but this is not just limited to Ahrefs. This is the challenge with every tool out there that can calculate internal PageRank for your site. But the general model that's a bit outdated is this idea that pages on your website, they link between each other, and based on those links, we can calculate internal PageRank, right? The reality, though, is that the websites and pages, they're not silos. They don't exist on islands on the web. The web is an ecosystem of websites, and that ecosystem is interlinked, right? This is the whole idea of Google and why Google became a $100 billion or maybe $1 trillion business, is because the web interlinks with each other, and that allows us to understand the importance or the relative importance of websites. So the key takeaway that I want you to focus on here is that pages link between each other, pages on different sites. It's not sites that link to each other, it's pages on these sites that are interlinked. So let's run this through a theoretical model, right? So we have our website, say this is your site, we run the internal PageRank calculation, and we can understand the internal PageRank that each page has on your site. Now, what happens when another website or a page on another website links to a page on your website? Shouldn't that impact or change your PageRank calculations? Or in other words, backlinks are absolutely crucial when it comes to PageRank calculations, because as we see now, I ran the numbers, the internal PageRank changes when we take backlinks into account, which makes a lot of sense, but it's something that most people don't consider. They don't factor it into their PageRank calculations, which then means that they make wrong assumptions and wrong decisions, and then come to the conclusion that internal link optimization doesn't work, right? So the big takeaway here is we need to factor backlinks into PageRank calculations for our site. The second important concept that kind of I want to say faded into the background over the years in SEO is this idea of chi-rank. So chi-rank is something like an opposite of PageRank, and we don't talk about it as much, but especially for large websites, it's actually pretty significant. So chi-rank, you can again imagine it like an inverse PageRank that describes how communicative a node is within a network, or basically relative to all pages on your website, how much does a certain page link out, again, compared to other pages on your site. So if a page has, or the page with the highest chi-rank tends to link out to other pages the most relatively to all pages on a website. Now let's bring this back into our PageRank calculation. We can calculate PageRank and chi-rank for every page on the site. And once we do that, we get a pretty good understanding of where PageRank is kind of quote unquote wasted and where PageRank is being kept on a site. And with these two metrics, we can optimize websites and really leverage the PageRank that it gets from other sites, right? So there are three metrics that want to combine in this model. There's the backlinks, and then there's PageRank, and then there's chi-rank. A couple of tools that you can use to calculate chi-rank and PageRank, because that's typically the first question that I get is like, okay, cool, I understand the concept. How do I actually do this? You can use a script that Jer Oaks was so kind to create many years ago that works pretty well with Moz data, but you can also just use Screaming Frog or Disto, Search Metrics, and there are a couple of other tools that do this as well. The tool is not, and I'm going to repeat this a couple of times here, the tools are not as important as understanding the concept. And to make that more accessible, I brought kind of two models that you can run yourself. There's one, Tipper, it's a bit more on the complicated side, has a high engineering effort, but then there's also Tipper Lite that you can create yourself with just a couple of tools. I'm going to walk you through exactly how you do that. So TIPR stands for True Internal Page Rank. It's a framework for internal page rank or internal link optimization. And it's based on the pillars that I mentioned before, right? It factors in backlinks when it comes to internal linking. It uses PageRank and KaiRank. And it's something you can scale, you can apply to any site out there, and you can repeat multiple times so that when you optimize your internal linking, you can actually measure and monitor the progress over time. Coming back to the Lesson Marketplace case study. So before we made changes, we ran an analysis of our link graph, so to say, of our inlinks and outlinks. And again, these are all internal links. And we saw a pretty big difference in terms of the internal link graph. So a high number of URLs actually had a lot of outgoing links and a few incoming links. So when we break that down by page type, this is a chart from back in the days. So quality of my charts has definitely improved over the years. But if you look at average PageRank and KaiRank by directory, we see that category pages on the Lesson Marketplace had a huge imbalance in terms that they got a lot of PageRank, but they had a very low KaiRank. So I would call that a PageRank hoarder, somebody, a type of page that keeps out a PageRank but doesn't pass it on to other pages. And it's especially important when it comes to large scalable sites or aggregators like the Lesson Marketplace. I'm going to explain a bit more what that means in a minute. So as I mentioned, on the left-hand side, you see categories. They're hoarding PageRank. They get on average almost 3,000 incoming links per page, but they only link out less than 50 times, right? So huge imbalance. And on the other side, on the right-hand side, in fact, you see these version history pages. So every app had a version history with updates, and they had links on these updates. And that created a huge imbalance because they had over 1,000 outgoing links on average per page, while only getting 12 incoming links. So you can kind of see the disparity here. And the solve is relatively simple, right? The solution to this is pretty easy. You just link out more on category pages and remove links on these version history pages. And that really led to the marketplace gaining so much traffic over time. On the right-hand side, I have a screenshot from SEMrush that shows the same kind of increase. Left-hand side is internal data, right-hand side is third-party data. And you can see the results pretty clearly in there. And so I want to show you this model of TIPR Lite that you can apply yourself to drive similar results for your own site. So TIPR Lite, all you need is a crawler, a backlink tool, and then Sheets or Excel, whatever you prefer. When it comes to crawlers, I prefer Screaming Frog for this model. I'm going to show you in a second why. But you can use almost every crawler out there, right? Whether it's Deep Crawl, Bodify, OnCrawl, you can use Ahrefs crawler, SEMrush crawler, Write, and then for the backlink tool, same thing. You can use pretty much any backlink tool, Ahrefs, SEMrush, Moz, Majestics, whatever works for you. So step one, you start by exporting the backlinks. An important piece here is you want to export backlinks by page. So in Ahrefs, for example, there would be the best pages by incoming links report. An important piece here is that you clean up your export. So you get a raw export by page, and then you remove any link that is not to an HTML page. So remove image links and all the other kind of stuff, JavaScript links, meta redirects, wherever else you find. And then you want to remove non-200 status code URLs. So in other words, remove all the 404s or 400 status codes, 500 status code URLs, redirects. So you really just want to have a clean list of HTML links. The list can get pretty big. So there might be some really large sites that might have to upload that export onto a BigQuery table or do the calculations in R. Next, you want to create a pivot table by URL. So when you create all the backlinks, you want to make sure that you map them to the specific URLs, which should be the case if you export it by page. But in some cases, some tools don't provide that feature. So make sure that you you map all links, all backlinks to a URL. Next step, you want to crawl your site, and you want to export all internal links. It can, again, get pretty big, so make sure to remove any non-HTML links, any non-200 status code URLs. And then when you export the internal links, you want to, once again, map these by URL. So in most cases, you have to create a pivot table. As you can see here in my example, I have stuff like crawl depth in there, link score, which is, I wouldn't focus too much on that. But then really important, and this is the most important column, is in links and out links. These are basically internal links to other pages, or incoming links, better said. And then out links are pages, are links on that page that go to other pages on that same website. These are absolutely crucial. Step number 4, you want to bring all of that data together. So by now you should have stuff like the internal links from your crawl. You see that here in these 2 columns. Ideally the link position. And this is what I really like about Screaming Frog, is that it will tell you where that link was found. Was it in the footer, header, in the content, in a site navigation, in something else? And then you want to have your backlinks as well. And when it comes to backlinks, you can either take the number of backlinks or the number of referring domains. I'm typically a bigger fan of the number of the referring domains, also called domain pop or domain popularity, simply because some domains have a lot of backlinks to the same target and it's typically not as useful. So I often use the number of referring domains. And then you basically you use VLOOKUPs to bring all of that data to the same table that is sorted by URL. So you want to make sure that you get all these metrics by the URL. And from here, it's actually pretty simple. Now you just have to sort by either in links or out links. And you want to basically look for 2 types of pages, right? There are the hoarders and the wasters. The hoarders have a lot of incoming links, but few outgoing links. Think about the Atlassian category pages that I mentioned earlier. And on the other hand, you have the wasters that have few incoming links and many outgoing links. And so you want to look for these 2 types of pages, and of course roll out changes to each of the pages, right? So if you have a lot of incoming links, few outgoing links, add more outgoing links to the wasters, right? So these 2 page types play together. So by reducing the number of incoming links, or better said, by increasing the number of outgoing links on the hoarders, you get automatically more incoming links to the wasters. And by reducing the number of outgoing links on the wasters, you get fewer incoming links on the hoarders. I hope that makes sense. I'll create a nice diagram and bring the concept across a little bit. But that's kind of the best way to optimize internal linking for most pages. Optionally, you can export your keyword ranks by URL and then see, for example, if URLs that rank worse for their main target keyword get a low amount of incoming links or get a low amount of backlinks. That will also help you as another filter or another layer or another dimension to look through to make some more calls on your internal link structure. Now, I already mentioned that it depends a little bit on your site. I mean, the optimal internal link structure depends a little bit on the type of site. And so I want to finish my presentation by comparing internal linking best practices for 2 types of sites that I call integrators or aggregators. Now, I didn't invent these terms. These are common terms for technology businesses. I'm going to explain a little bit what they mean and how they impact internal link structure. So, look at this graph. This is a crawl from Screaming Frog. It shows kind of the internal link graph for a site. And now compare that with this graph. You probably notice that they're significantly different. When we put them next to each other, it will make even more sense. So we have 2 sites here, Amazon and Atlassian, and they work in fundamentally different ways. You can already tell by the internal link structure. On the left-hand side, you see more islands that have smaller islands around them. And on the right-hand side, everything is a bit more centralized. Everything is a bit more centered around kind of the middle. And that is intentional. There's a strong reason for that. And so the concept I want to bring across here is integrators versus aggregators. Typically, when we speak about integrators, we're talking about SaaS companies or apps or enterprise companies. The common denominator that they all have is that they create the content themselves, right? So that's why why I have CGC here. This is company created content, and of course the opposite is user generated content. And these are business models like e-commerce sites, social networks, or marketplaces. And they work in fundamentally different ways. So when we think about internal linking, for example, integrators, of course, they have top nav and a footer, but they work much more with in-body links or related articles at the end of a piece of content. Sometimes they have a sub-nav. A couple of examples that I wanted to bring here. NerdWallet is a great example. They've done a really good job in using their top navigation to link to some of their biggest moneymaker pages. Zapier has a great approach where at the end of articles, they link to tags, but also to mentioned apps in the articles, which I find pretty elegant. And then we also have, of course, the New York Times, best practice for footer links, where they really link to the most important category pages and hub pages on their site. And then lastly, SurveyMonkey, also pretty elegant. Love these use cases where they link to important calculators or other important landing pages. On the other hand, we have sites like aggregators, right? And of course, they have a top nav and footer as well, but they use link modules in a very different way. Very popular, similar categories, or people also bought an e-commerce, and this is a very, very translatable concept to other page type or to other business models as well. So TripAdvisor is an example. They have these near me pages, which are bringing a ton of traffic. And at the bottom, the link to other near me pages. Zillow does a very similar thing where if you look for apartments on a category in a city, they show you related searches, so different types of apartments, houses, but then also the smaller suburbs and regions around that city. So very, very elegant interlink structure. And lastly, when we look at the homepage of Zillow, on the left-hand side, you see the basic state of the homepage. On the right-hand side, you see what happens when you click on the foldouts, and you see there's a ton of internal linking here. So a very different scale that aggregators can optimize on compared to integrators. But to bring that back and bring that home, so integrators, when they apply a model like Tipper or Tipper Lite, they really want to focus on driving more page rank, internal page rank that is, to their moneymaker pages, which are typically landing pages. They get a lot of effort or a lot of results, better said, from optimizing internal link text, and need to really think about how to build internal linking into their content creation workflow. On the other hand, we have aggregators, and for them, it's much more important to balance metrics like PageRank and KaiRank out across the site, because they work with a few page types that are scaled across hundreds of thousands or millions of pages, right? And for them, the biggest returns really come from thinking about new internal link modules and creating more hub pages. So to summarize that, the biggest problem that I see when it comes to internal linking is people not taking backlinks into account and forgetting metrics like KaiRank, which can be especially important for aggregators. And then when it comes to integrators versus aggregators, integrators really, they should think all day about focus, whereas aggregators should think about balance to optimize their internal linking. And with that, I want to thank you so much for tuning in and paying attention. You can find me on Twitter at Kevin_Indig or on my blog/newsletter on kevin-indig.com. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kevin. And as Santi mentioned earlier, internal linking is something that's extremely important to me. It was preached to me by my mentors, and it's actually something that I've been preaching to my team, whether it was at my last publisher or the current one. So we wanted to start off with some questions. In your first days as an SEO, what would you have wanted to know about internal link optimization?
That's a fantastic question. I think the biggest point really is that different types of sites have to approach internal linking in different ways, right? I spoke about integrators versus aggregators, and so just understanding the difference and not trying to solve similar problems with different methods is something that I wish I had known earlier. That I had to find out the painful way.
Yeah, the painful way sometimes is not the most fun way to find about things, but you definitely learn it and then you take it forward from there. Thanks again, Kevin, for your talk, and just a couple more questions. I think this is really relevant to the topic. How do you think, CMS technology influences internal link optimization, for better or for worse? What's your take on that?
It's a great question. Picking a CMS is one of the biggest decisions that a business, in my mind, can make when SEO is important to them. And so, of course, CMSs might impact internal linking. And there are pros and cons. For small businesses, for example, picking the right CMS can resolve a lot of things and can bring a lot of results out of the box. Whereas for a large business that scales, most of the time they build their own CMS or they heavily customize them, and that can bring pros and cons with them as well. So at G2, for example, where I worked before Shopify, it was a kind of a custom setup or a custom stack. And the internal link graph was much more like a hashtag structure, where at Atlassian, we had a third-party CMS that also worked well, but it was a much more hierarchical structure. So long story short, CMS makes a big difference, and you want to be very mindful, and it's a decision that you want to make very, very slowly instead of fast.
And a lot of times, Kevin, when we think about internal linking and the building of it, we think about it with established websites, right? We think about it in the established space, whether e-commerce or news. What would you prioritize when working on internal linking when you're actually building a new site?
Yeah, it's such a great question, because I think the common model for that is to say, okay, we have a homepage, we have category pages, we have product pages. And I actually want to flip that on the head. I actually want to think about internal linking for a news site in terms of what are the most important pages that really make the money, that compete for the most difficult keywords out there, that need the most internal page rank and that need the most backlinks, and everything should kind of funnel up to these pages. So if I could start from scratch, I would really think about the moneymaker pages.
Okay, perfect. Well, thank you very much, Kevin, on LinkedIn. And I found one of your posts that you posted earlier today, and I was like, this guy just keeps on giving information. So to keep going with today's SEO Day, I think we have another very special talk, and I think one that you are definitely going to enjoy, Claudio. For a second year in a row, we have the pleasure of welcoming Andrew Coco. At the moment, he is SEO Director at Peacock and NBC Sports. He's been in the SEO industry for quite a long time, over 10 years, and he's worked at leading companies such as Digitus North America and as a senior SEO manager for the Walt Disney Company. Andrew, welcome again. It's great to have you here.
It's great to be here. Thanks for the intro.
Absolutely. And me and Andrew actually started chatting about maybe 2 weeks ago or 2 months ago. I'm not sure. But we crossed paths. We've both been in the SEO space for a long time. And actually now he's a competitor because he's at NBC Sports. I'm at The Athletic. So we're going to be going head to head a lot on some really special events. So today Andrew's going to be talking about the 10 things he wished he knew earlier in his SEO career, which is something that, I could probably sit down and think about as well. You could probably think about it and think about as well. So welcome, Andrew. And, the floor is yours. How does it feel to be part of SEO Day for the second time?
It's really exciting. Happy to be here. And yeah, although you mentioned we're competitors, I really value your guidance and you chatting with me too. But yeah, I'm excited to be with a group of people that I've looked up to for a while and people that I learned from. So really cool to be here.
Great, Andrew. So the floor is yours.
Wonderful. Yeah. So thanks for the intro again. Yeah, I'll be talking about 10 things I wish I knew earlier in my SEO career. So yeah, I've been to a few conferences and stuff, and I feel like, sometimes they're very tactical or very nuance for a specific business. And I think the work that I've been doing recently would probably be talking to a small audience. So I figured I'd chat with people earlier in their career, just getting started, and I think I can provide, more value to a lot more people there. So yeah, you introed me a little bit, but I just want to say, who am I? Andrew Coco. Sometimes that last name, since this is an international conference, that last name might remind you of an animated movie, or I know we might have some Brazilians in the audience, so you might just be laughing at my last name. I think people that speak Portuguese will understand that joke. But yeah, currently at NBC Universal, I lead the SEO strategy for Peacock and also NBC Sports. In Peacock, the work that I'm doing is really full scope, technical SEO content and trying to build our authority. And then for NBC Sports, a lot more technical focus in really helping the editors do their job well and getting them search insights. I was on the agency side for a while, working on clients, big and small and exciting and sometimes kind of boring, all over the place. And then found my way moving in-house. And when I moved to an in-house role, really found what my strengths are and how I can, really move my way up in-house role. And I like the problem solving that comes with in-house SEO. So yeah, with this different experiences that I had, wanted to talk through sort of what I know now and what I had wished I'd known sooner. In my current role, actually, I wanted to highlight something that's really exciting and that I was able to do this past year working on the Olympics for NBC Sports and trying to get more traffic to a lot of the NBC Sports profiles, our websites, is actually me and my team got credit on the Olympics broadcast, which is something I didn't think was going to be possible, working on websites. But super cool, and wanted to shout out my team. They're a bunch of all-stars and really happy to have worked on that. So yeah, I'll jump straight into things that I wish I had known earlier in my SEO career that I can tell myself. First is, use SEO skills outside of just SEO. Right, I'm a big fan of not staying in your lane, right? And realizing that search data is interesting because it's users actually raising their hand and typing in Google, and we see that insights into what they're searching for, and that data is useful beyond just what is in a traditional SEO job description or what you might be tasked with. So I'll tell myself to try to look for opportunities where SEO data or the SEO tools that we use or the SEO skill sets that I have can help cross-functional departments, solve their goals and solve their day-to-day issues and solve their problems. And so plenty of examples, like technical crawlers for QA purposes, or, page speed to help different creative or dev departments. But a few that I've learned and had success with, keyword research to help guide different teams and the keyword research skills that SEO has. So paid search, actually, when I was at Digitas, the role that I was working on was paid search. I realized that I didn't really like paid search, but I realized that SEO skills can be applied there. So, helping paid search teams define what they bid on or be more efficient with how they spend. For e-commerce, product assortment decisions. So using search data, especially when you see like seasonal trends in search, you might see big jumps in certain seasons, but maybe some buying teams need some more data to justify having a product throughout the entirety of a year rather than just the season focus. And then similarly, like product naming decisions. At one of my roles previously, I was luckily able to get enough influence in the organization that the data that provided and the insights that I had from search were able to actually help influence and help guide what we would actually name products. And in the long run, that paid out in SEO efforts because, then we had the product actually name how people search, and we had that title, in the page just automatically. So that helps a bunch. And then there's other reasons why using your skills and then helping other teams outside of SEO is super important. The first is just relationship building, right? It's helping other teams and utilizing your skills to help other teams is a great way to just build relationships with cross-functional teams. And that's super important in SEO. And then going out of your way to do so to help others, right? You shouldn't necessarily use this, have this mindset going in that you'll get something out of this, but in the long run, usually it pays off. And the benefits will come back to you. And if not, I guess the downside is that you are a good person to other teams, and that's no real downside at all. And another reason this is important is department visibility, right? SEO, unfortunately, is not a channel that's always top of mind or super important across an organization. But getting shout outs from other teams and being involved in larger issues. And so if another team is saying some of the work that they've done and they highlight the SEO team or SEO tool help them, it gets more visibility, it gets more importance to SEO, and in the long run, maybe more buy-in or makes that buy-in a little bit easier. Another is teach partners how to fish, right? I think this is super important. And in other words, it's just like getting others to do SEO for you, right? And helping them, enabling them to do things that can help SEO if their role can directly or indirectly impact organic search or organic performance or how the website performs. So a few ways to do this. One is like thoroughly answer questions and educate people as often as you can, again, especially if their role can impact SEO in some way. And so be ready to answer questions, to educate those around you, to help vet ideas, and go above and beyond to do so. And then also very important when doing so is like in a respectful manner always, but point to existing documentation and reinforce that there's existing documentation when that exists. Another important piece about teaching cross-functional partners how to fish and how to be successful in their role that might impact SEO is to not reject bad ideas outright, right? Don't lead with no, and instead try to understand the real ask or the intention behind their proposed solution or the proposed fix, and find a collaborative way to be involved there. And I think these things, early in my career, I wasn't so great at understanding that this was part of SEO. I think I thought like these asks or helping other teams was pulling me away from my day-to-day work. But I think slowly over time, I realized like that is a huge aspect of my job, is like helping others and educating those around me. Another important lesson that I wish I'd known earlier is that SEO is just a small piece of a much larger puzzle, right? So things like understanding legal hurdles or profit margins, supply issues for companies, or how SEO fits in with overall marketing channels and how other channels can drive search engine interest for what we'll be optimizing for. And so concept that I like to use and that a professor in college actually taught me is having nodding knowledge of something. So just like being able to nod along and having enough insight or knowledge of other teams' workflows and all these different aspects of a business to just keep a conversation going and then have a seat at a table with teams that may not be directly in SEO, but it's important to have this larger knowledge set to give better and more well thought out SEO recommendations. So I can think of an example in the past of where at an e-commerce company that I worked at, I saw this huge opportunity in search and for a product that we had on the site. And I thought, put in a bunch of work and finding how we can grow this and, how we can build a section of the site for this types of products. And then when I delivered it, I had more an eye-opening experience where I learned that, the margins on this product were so low, and that's why we hadn't grown there. And so to do so wouldn't have really made sense because the margins are so low, and against other priorities, it just didn't make sense, right? So having that larger context of how things work overall just gives you a better insight into providing more actionable and truly valuable SEO recommendations. Another thing I wish I knew is that, the fundamentals work, right? And they may not be the most exciting, shiny new objects or cool new case studies and stuff. Those are fun, but they don't always fit into an SEO strategy, and maybe they're expensive or there's a number of reasons why they may not fit for a certain site. The simple stuff, titles, descriptions, H1s, internal links. Kevin just gave a great talk on internal links, but getting these simple things right, or these seemingly simple things right, is not always exciting, but doing them at scale for me is now super, super exciting, right? And so chasing the more complex or the more advanced things also might not pan out or be as successful or be a wasted effort if you don't have this strong, foundational stuff in a great place. And I'd also tell myself that, it's true for tools as well. Right. So I have some tools listed here like Excel and Screaming Frog, and, understanding how advanced you can get with some of the configurations on Screaming Frog or the data nuances in Search Console, those types of things. Becoming an expert at these foundational tools I would tell myself, to waste less time learning this cool, new, exciting tool that, is going to change throughout the years, and focus on these. And then I guess you also learn which of the new tools or proposed tools that come to you or that you learn about are truly adding value, or they're just, a reskin version of what you can automate with existing tools or cheaper tools. And then another important piece about fundamentals, right? So the fundamentals are usually consistent across site, and are going to work across all sites. But the bigger things, or for other things, what you see worked for another site may not work for yours, right? So the newest case study or anecdotal win that you see from an SEO or an SEO agency might look exciting, but I would tell myself to be careful how much you invest in trying to replicate that success, because I've done that in my past, and it didn't pan out as cool as what I've seen in the case study I was trying to follow. Another tough pill to swallow is that nobody cares about SEO. That's not true for us. We're all here at a conference called SEOday, and probably a lot of us have SEO in our job title or job description. But this isn't necessarily a bad thing, right? So try to use this to my advantage and try to understand the motivations or what really clicks for cross-functional partners or who you're reporting to. So one of the things that I tried to think about or would tell myself in the past is report on what your boss reports on and what your boss needs to show success on. So for most people, the most important thing is going to be, revenue and traffic. But there's also high priority marketing campaigns and things like that. And so even if your overall SEO strategy is not focused on this existing or this highly current marketing campaign, reporting on how your efforts impacted that, even if it's not the biggest driver in traffic for you that week or that month, reporting on that can help your reports get leveled up and again get more insight or more visibility and all that into your SEO work. And one thing I try to do internally is avoid SEO buzzwords and industry jargon and pushing people away with confusing subject matter. So stick to the stuff that people know. And of course, when simplifying a topic, always be sure to link to or make it available or include in an appendix of whatever slide you're working on, more thorough documentation, right? Always making that available if someone does want to dive a little deeper and enabling them to dive a little deeper. Another thing I'll tell myself is that the little wins don't matter, right? They compound in importance and they are a driving force to go forward, but relationships and long-term success and scalable wins are what really pushes the needle or moves the needle forward. And tell myself to not sacrifice, quick wins for or short-term gains for long-term relationships, stuff like that. It's something I have to tell myself, even in my current role, right? I have the keys to the CMS to a few sites, and I can go in and change title tags or a bunch of stuff, but that's not my job, right? My job is to do things at scale. And I would tell myself to also think big or think bigger, even with small, like short-term, fast turnaround asks. So something simple, like if someone asks for some search data on something that they're working on or something that they want to explore, give that to them, and also build a dashboard that they can reference for going forward, or like a quick Google sheet that pulls in like a SEMrush API that they can just plug in some search terms and it pulls in the search data for them, right? Enable them to do that going forward. And then also would have myself be able to identify, small opportunities versus very large opportunities, and not allow those more trivial things to get in the way of high impact or super important long-term optimizations. I guess similarly to that is like understanding that not everything will be perfect, and it doesn't need to be, right? There are no perfect websites out there. The easy part is like identifying what is wrong with the website. I can't tell you how many countless emails I get or LinkedIn messages saying, hey, our tool can fix this thing you have on your website. And it's like I know about that, right? But it's not in my priority list. So like understanding that the important piece is prioritizing and finding true long-term fixes that are going to lead to increased traffic and increased revenue and a better user experience on the site. And I tell myself, that there are multiple correct answers or multiple ways to solve a problem. And I don't need to necessarily win that, right? And it doesn't need to be my way. The important piece is that working collaboratively with other teams and getting things across the finish line is way more important than like my way of this problem getting fixed or this SEO solution going into production. And I guess similarly, in that not every website will be perfect, is, you know, like I would tell myself to forget the SEO checklists and the audit tools and that type of stuff. There will be plenty of flags on different audits, or, you know, different SEO reporting tools will tell you things are errors and stuff, and that's not always gospel, right? Like, not all SEO work is a top priority, and not all things need to be fixed. So these like 200-point audits and stuff that, you know, I've done in the past, or that I've seen still get delivered, are not always super important. And, you know, don't do SEO tasks just for the sake of doing them, and just for the sake of, you know, getting the green status on everything, or okay status, like thumbs up, whatever your SEO tool is reporting. You know, stick to the big fixes and the big wins that'll truly push the business forward, truly add value to the end user. Those are the important pieces. And I would also tell myself to, you know, look at the search results for your top keywords. I mean, as much as you can, but definitely for your top keywords. Search regularly for your top terms. Get into the search results. You know, like ranking metrics and search feature reports and share of voice metrics. All of these are really great. Plenty of tools provide these. Really great at understanding the search landscape at scale, but nothing for me beats, you know, going into search regularly and seeing how the landscape changes, how competitors are moving, what new features are coming and going. This is definitely not scalable, but it's super important to do over time. Or, you know, Barry was on this call earlier, or you can follow Barry and he'll let you know what was new and what wasn't, and a good way to stay up to date with how search is changing and all the new features there. And then finally, I would tell myself to become a subject matter expert, right? And allow myself to become a subject matter expert and really take ownership of that. Internally first, but externally, if that matters. I know on the agency side as well, that's super important to, you know, publicly display the subject matter expert that you or that your agency has, and taking ownership of that, like recognizing that you have SEO in your job title, or you have SEO in your job description, and your colleagues don't necessarily, right? And they lean on you for that expertise. And so that's something that I maybe didn't have the confidence to, or maybe wasn't enabled to earlier in my career, but I wish I had. Because it's on me as the SEO or as the person that's tasked with this, to have that answer, to be available to find that answer, and, you know, carve out time in my day to find that answer, or to plan or make a plan on how to test to get that answer. And then another big piece of that is like giving internal presentations and trainings, and that helps you sharpen your SEO skills. And it goes back to some of the things I mentioned earlier, right? Is teaching partners how to fish, and relationship building and visibility for your department, right? That's all super important. And then I think the last piece is networking and learning from others. And I've learned so much from like plenty of people on this presentation with me. But also just plenty of people that are nice enough to make their work public. And then I have my subject matter expert here. I didn't mention them in the call, but I'll call myself a meme expert. I'm nowhere on the level that Izzy is, but I'll throw my hat in the ring. I hope you guys enjoyed my memes. So yeah, that's the things that I wish I knew earlier in my career. Have a wrap up of what they are here, but also Claudio mentioned that we connected a couple months ago. So I also want to encourage people to DM, to reach out to me, and I'd be happy to make time available, similar to what Claudio did. You know, help give some advice, help you solve some problems you might be working on, some career advice, or just chat SEO. Or I'm a big sports fan. If anyone wants to chat, reach out. I'm always happy to talk. Thank you very much for your time and for listening.
Great. Thank you very, very much, Andrew. That was really great 10 points. I don't know if I would have added any other ones, but I personally felt identified with many of those. And I'm sure other, not only people in the audience, but speakers as well have probably identified with many of those things that you mentioned. And personally, I found that one of the most appealing ones was, I think it was number 4, if I'm not mistaken, 3 or 4, where you were mentioning that SEO is definitely part of a bigger picture. Now, Claudio loves SEO, I love SEO, everybody here loves SEO, But even some of our viewers and some of our audience members may not be just SEOs, and they're looking at, say, what can I learn from SEOday and take it into my business, into my website, into my overall strategy. So I'm not going to ask you about sources for specific SEO knowledge because you shared a few as well, but I was wondering if you have any particular resources that you go to, for example, maybe a little bit more broader within digital marketing, where you can kind of start seeing, hey, what's going on in these other channels and how does that tie into what we do? What would you suggest people to look to for information there?
Yeah, there's plenty. So I like the big ones like Adweek and stuff like that, right? That talk about advertising overall. But there's a great newsletter called TLDR Marketing, I believe it's called. And it talks about updates in social, in paid search, and a bunch of different stuff, and even just like web stuff in general that's changing. So that's one that I have in my inbox that I check regularly. So big shout outs to that newsletter. But yeah, I like to stay up to date in not only marketing in general, but the industries I'm working on. So sports, watch a lot of sports, and entertainment. I work in entertainment as well. So staying up to date and all those is super important.
It's probably a bit easier to stay up to date with sports, a bit more fun. Even if we love SEO, staying up to date with sports, I think we're both big sports fans as well.
Sports fans, yeah.
So yeah, we can stay up to date, no problem with that.
A much lighter topic for sure with sports. So Andrew, one thing that a lot of editorial SEOs think about a lot is how they can improve their skill set. When you think of programming languages like Python, JavaScript, and more, do you think it's important to apply those as a skill set or actually learn them as a skill set? Or do you think there's other areas where you can sort of learn different things that can be beneficial to SEO as well?
I think there are definitely. I would say in my role, I haven't had a ton of experience with those for programming languages, Python and JavaScript, stuff like that. I have, a nodding knowledge where I can nod around with the conversation and stay up to date, right, and not be left out of conversations. But I would say that I don't know if it's truly a programming language, but like HTML, I consider myself great in HTML. Was in the early days of like MySpace and getting in and updating my profile as a child, right? And that helped me as the framework of understanding HTML, and I use that in my day-to-day, right? So I think HTML is important, and then depending on your role and what you're tasked with, probably those deeper programming knowledges may or may not be important depending on the tasks you're working on.
Awesome. So we wanted to thank you, Andrew. Obviously, the second time you've been with us. Great presentation, and I'm definitely going to take some of those learnings with me. I'm sure Santi will as well.
Yes, absolutely. No, and I really, before I let you go, Andrew, the nodding concept, I think that's brilliant. I haven't really thought about it that way before, but I think it's really important to create that rapport, maybe with other teams that, as you mentioned, we like to talk about SEO, but we know we're not the center of the universe. So I think we should know that we're not the center of the universe, and we have to speak with other teams that have kind of similar behavior as well. And being able to nod along and continue with certain conversations says, okay, this guy is not simply coming and pushing his agenda. This guy's actually understanding where I'm coming from. He's trying to create this relationship where we can actually make something work. And I think at the end of the day, that's crucial to SEO. So thanks again for your talk, and hope to see you soon as well.
Thank you very much for having me.
Talk soon.
Take care, Andrew.
Take care, Andrew.
So that was a great talk. We went from technical, we went to something a bit more soft. I think we're going to continue with a bit of mix of everything. I think we still have quite a few talks that are going to be interesting. So stick around, and we'll be back in a second.
Hi again. What a great day, right? I am here to let you know that every year during every event we give you out some presents. So sharing our hashtag SEOday in social media, you are participating to win a free iPad. It will be 2 winners. Stay tuned until the end of the event and good luck to everyone. All yours again.
Muchas gracias, Tev. Thank you very, very much. Let's keep moving.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is sort of like a mini main event right here, right? With these two individuals coming up. So since more than 3 editions, we've had the pleasure to share this event with 2 SEO experts that not only are excellent professionals, but also great people and friends. We actually were hanging out with them in Spain a few months ago. And one of them actually lives in New York. She lives in Brooklyn. I live in Manhattan. And she's always telling me that Brooklyn's better than Manhattan, but don't listen to her. And today, the both of them will be talking about SEO success. in 2022 and the top areas to focus on.
And it's great to part of this international event. Actually, both of these experts were here at our SEO Day event a couple of months ago, giving a talk on a panel in Spanish, and now they're coming back and doing it in English. And I think that's really interesting to happen. So please welcome Lily Ray and Aleida Solis to this new edition of SEO Day in English. Aleida, Lily, can you hear us?
Yes. Yes, indeed.
How are
Hi,
you
everyone.
both?
Great to see you guys.
Hello, hello. Great to see you again.
Likewise.
Great to have you with us. So we don't want to take any more of your time. We just want to sit here and listen. When you guys start talking and we leave off, we get some chairs and we sit here and we just watch you guys speak. So please, the floor is yours and we'll speak in a little bit.
Awesome.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, so we, Aleida and I have been talking about how to approach this discussion, and we kind of just want to keep it casual. I think we talked about having like a little drink. I currently only have water, but Aleida has coffee.
I have in my SEO coffee here. Yeah, let's make it this an SEO drinks type of conversation, as if we were in a little bit of a coffee shop, like not one in Amsterdam, just like, but one in, let's say one in Manhattan or in Buenos Aires. But, that would be an amazing one.
Yeah.
To have this conversation about the top trends in our industry in a very laid back type of conversation, right, Lily?
Yes, that sounds perfect. And we have a few different overarching topics that we want to discuss today. So maybe we'll dive right in. How's that sound?
Let's go. So if you want, let's start with the fundamentals, right? Because even if a lot of the conversations going on, and of course they are important about the updates, whether core updates, product reviews, visual search features, etc. Like there's this fundamental base that we all need to handle first and foremost before moving on to all the more sophisticated type of areas, which are pretty much crawlability, indexability, content relevance, right? Like the fundamentals, the pillars of SEO that have been there like already for a while. Although we know that they have become more complex, for example, with JavaScript frameworks becoming a thing that we need to optimize for and to ensure that the crawlability is okay. Websites becoming much more sophisticated and having the necessity to optimize further the different facets in order to better focus on rank for keywords, for queries that have different type of intents, etc., right? But this particular topic, I would like that potentially to discuss with you something that unfortunately is there. Like I think that these areas, because they are the fundamentals of SEO, is the area that we all start learning about, and most of us master like rather quickly. But then the issue that we see on a day-to-day basics is not an issue of knowledge necessarily, but an issue of execution.
Yeah.
What is holding us back in order to actually make things happen, to advance, to let's say to advance the optimization and fixing type of activities first in order to start building and actually developing further our SEO strategy, right? So I wanted to start with this conversation about the most common unfortunate type of scenarios, bugs, issues, challenges that end up affecting right now in 2022 our SEO process execution, especially the fundamentals.
Yeah, I think I'm really happy you brought up this topic because one thing that I am pretty open about is, I'm in a role at an agency where I hire people, and for the record, every person that I interview, I always ask, what's the difference between crawling, indexing, rendering, and ranking? And like every person who works in SEO should know this stuff, right? And most people have a general understanding, but what's really interesting is there's a lot of people that make it to a certain point in their SEO career without really truly understanding how things work. So I think it's very important for SEOs of all levels to really get a good grasp on all these different concepts, especially rendering and indexing, which I feel like are kind of changing over time. And I also think it's worth noting that there seems to be, I don't know that Google's officially confirmed this, I kind of have heard them suggest as much, but in the past like 6 months, there's a lot of discussion about the indexing process having changed. And it seems like the criteria for indexing has gotten more strict over the past few months. I don't know if you've seen this as well, Aleida, but like we have a lot of clients here where the client says the content's good. We look at it, it's decent, but it's just not getting indexed. So, and Google has been asked this question many times in the past few months. They're basically saying like, yeah, like, I think just a couple of days ago in Spain, Gary was like, we're dealing with way too much competition, way too many URLs. The competition's getting higher. We can't store all this content. Like there's not enough disk space. So indexing is getting more difficult. So I don't know if you've encountered that with your clients, Aleida.
100%. This is an issue that I face with my clients. Even if my clients are very authoritative type of websites, when they release a new section or when there's a migration happening from a very specific area or a release of very specific product line or new facet, it's not as quick and straightforward as before. Even with my own websites, that I have the Learning SEO website. I don't know if you saw the other day I released this free online SEO learning courses as a new section for the website. And actually, I took it as a case study for the freelance coalition that I am tutoring. It hasn't been indexed yet. Oh my God, I have been sharing in social. I have been linking from other websites. I have been tweaking the content to make it more unique, comprehensive, specific. Nothing yet.
Wow.
Before when I did this, it happened literally after a few hours. Wow. And very similar pages. So there's certainly something happened. What it took my attention from the answer from Gary last week, though, is that he totally mentioned about the need to focus on authority.
Yeah, absolutely.
In order to incentivize this indexing process by them, indeed.
Yeah, and he also mentioned, like, somebody asked, what should I do in the situation like the one you're describing where the thing is not getting indexed? And I also think it's very interesting and worth noting that you sharing something on social, like you as a person with many, many followers, generally speaking, in my experience, that's led to, like you said, almost instant indexation, and in some cases like ranking and discover and all these different things. But if your content after you share it is not being indexed, that to me sounds like there's been a really big change at Google.
100%. And it's not a crawlability, not rendered issue, by the way. I troubleshoot it, Google Search Console, everything is fine, etc. So it's a matter of them included in the index. Indeed.
And Gary said something else that was really interesting, which is somebody asked, what should you do in that situation? And he said, you should get more people to be looking for your content, through other marketing channels. You should make that content more popular. I think the example was somebody that was launching content internationally and maybe they didn't have as much of a presence in the other country. And they're like, he's like, you need to build a presence in that other country so people are looking for your content. So Google knows that there's demand for it, for them to be able to index it. It's such an interesting concept.
At the end of the day, I can totally, if we try to place ourselves in their shoes, it's like there's so much content indeed out there. There's what do we have to offer that is truly unique, that they know that they cannot leave out our pages out of their index, otherwise it will be something negative for them, right? And for that is indeed let's ensure that these pieces of content are not only from a content quality standpoint unique, but this popularity and authority signals that they need, and they will be taking more and more into consideration, it seems, right? Yeah. Now to even consider them, not only to rank them, to even consider them to go into their index. Yeah.
Yeah. And I don't know about you, but crawled but not indexed and discovered but not indexed, those coverage reports in Search Console are generally speaking the first place where I start a lot of my audits, especially for larger sites. So I've run into many different examples in the past couple of years where these sites have used this approach of generating thousands or millions of pages. In many cases, it's city or state pages or a templated version of a page that gets duplicated many, many times. And if you go into the coverage report, you'll see that most of that stuff is not being indexed. And the client's, it's unique, it's different. It's not really. And that's a pattern that I'm seeing really frequently. So one thing that I would recommend for people is to, before you index everything, before you try to get everything indexed, think really carefully about what you want Google to consider. Because when you put yourself in a situation where there's millions of URLs that are crawled but not indexed, there's a very good chance that Google's going to basically slow down its crawl rate of the pages that actually matter on your site. So I don't know about you, Aleida, but that's something I've run into a lot recently.
It's sad, but I work with a lot of e-commerce marketplaces. If you see this type of website, they end up featuring or having way many more URLs that are left out of the index like this, then those are actually indexed. With SaaS, these are not the type of clients that I tend to work with. A lot is different because like the number of URLs are like much more smaller, right? But for bigger websites that handle products with very dynamic inventory, I imagine that in your case that you work a lot with publications too will be the same. You need to really be careful to ensure that those areas and type of pages that actually matter, well, you really need to take care of them, to differentiate them, to make them unique, internal linking, promotional actions to ensure that the right signals are all aligned to ensure that Google take these pages into consideration for sure. That's 100%.
Yeah, exactly. It's definitely a big issue with publisher sites as well, because we work with clients who have been publishing content for 15 years or 20 years, and it's important to like structure your site in such a way, like you just said, that you're showing Google which pages are the most important to crawl, and you're kind of letting the older stuff or the things that's not adding value for your site anymore kind of like fall off a little bit, because you only have so much crawl budget to work with. So you can't expect everything on your site to be crawled. And if you're seeing a lot of the older content, maybe it's not as good, like not being indexed, you should maybe think about a strategy where Google isn't spending its time crawling the content that's not adding value for searchers.
Like, I think that the beauty is now we have the URL inspect API to use, let's say, to double check, to validate quite easily and overlay and blend that data with one of our own crawling simulations with the SEO crawlers. I really like content king, especially when working with highly dynamic websites, because not only for errors to be alerted, but in order to ensure that, when a page is published, like it is featuring everything necessary that has been specified, from structured data, metadata, internal links, how many internal links, all of this information that you tend to get with an SEO crawler is amazing. How Content King, which is, I will say, is like the tool that I am like really in love lately, much more because of how fast it gives me this information in order to stay on top. It will be amazing with the URL inspect tool, that there shouldn't be such a little restriction in terms of capacity to give you data per day, because the limitation, right?
Not a lot, and so I think that tool is such a game changer. And to your point, I think it's 2,000 URLs per property per day. But like, that's another example of like why setting up subfolders in Search Console is a very effective tool, just to be able to 100%. Access that index coverage report at scale.
100%. Okay, to move on with the next area, right? Like, once that we have the basics, the fundamentals, and the understanding of it, and also to stay on top of whatever can go wrong. So, like recurrent crawls and tools like Little Warden or SEO and Content King are highly recommended. The next, let's say, layer of the pie here will be to ensure that our content, even more than before, is authoritative, trustworthy, and expert focus, right? Or expert driven, right? And I have to say something, as someone who actually works with real experts in certain areas and fields, and then also I own a couple of websites that have some affiliate in them too. Oh my God, it's hard. It's hard not only when you are an affiliate, because I guess that a lot of these products reviews that Google has also released that go in hand on showing real authenticity of experience, and that the review is also trustworthy and the content is high quality, not only for me as an affiliate, but also for the real expert. This is a conversation we were having a few days ago too in La Manga about him, the person that I work with, being a real fitness expert. That this is the client that I have. And he's really well known, has millions of followers, etc. It's hard to ensure that all of the presence, all of the content actually is very well aligned with this best practices and signals that we know that Google takes care into consideration, because there's so much content that this person is publishing every single time, and historical data. So it's a lot of work, right? I would like that if you can cover this, Lily, because I know that you are very focused in this area too.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think I've just gave several talks about the E component of EAT, so expertise, and how a lot of like niche, like bloggers or people that run websites who happen to be experts in their respective areas. So I gave some examples about like a beekeeper or somebody that works in like home contracting. Like they actually have that job, but they either run a site or they're involved in the content production process for the site. So I think this is something that my team and I have been trying to do more of, where it's like, generally speaking, as an SEO agency, we work with the SEO team, or we work with the content marketing team, or the internal marketing teams with the companies that we work with. What we're trying to do more of is say, can we have a conversation with the actual expert that works at the company? Can we send them like a questionnaire about all these things that we would need to know for our blog or our article to be more focused on actual expert information? Can they collaborate with us, or better yet, can they like help us write the article so we can use their name and kind of like tie that back to maybe a bio page or any type of page that they have talking about that expert at the company. So the more that we do that, the more that we found that, Google is rewarding content that is either legitimately coming from experts or it's kind of reviewed by experts, because they can go through it line by line and say, that's not true, that is true. And I really think that's what Google's looking for. But to your point, Aleda, about like the fitness example or the health example, one big risk with this strategy is that if you work with a client who, for better or for worse, contradicts what Google's looking for in terms of medical consensus, historical consensus, scientific consensus, like we've worked with a lot of natural wellness publications. The unfortunate reality for these types of sites is that there is like some general truth that Google's looking for on certain topics, that's very clear in their quality guidelines, very controversial, but like there are certain opinions in certain areas where Google probably won't rank you if you have that type of content. So if you are publishing content on health and wellness and how to treat cancer or any of these things, like you have to be really careful that you're basically reflecting what the authorities are saying.
This is interesting, and it seems like it is logical, but you can see it on the other way around, right? Because I was actually talking about this with the head of content of this website, and she was telling me, look, I'm okay trying to link out, for example, to more publication, like reliable fitness health magazines that have covered something what this influencer has said, but I need to verify first that the quotes, etc., are the correct ones. Funnily enough, because this person, he comes up with new stuff. Yeah. He's a leader in his sector, so sometimes there is not even anybody to link out to or to refer to. These citations to bigger type of authoritative sources are hard and challenging because of this. Because if you're the leader, is like, where do you look up to? It's a little bit like that, right? So of course, and also because of persona, image, whatever, you don't want to be linking out to everybody else out there because you're the leader in your sector. So it's funny, it's tricky, it's trickier than what it looks like because of all of this, right? And at the end of the day, these are actual businesses, people, etc., out there that beyond SEO and whatever best practices Google might be looking to, they need to blend these best practices on their actual, let's say, guidelines, editorial guidelines, and tone of voice, etc., and how they handle in general.
Yeah, it's really challenging in these types of situations. We've worked with a number of clients where they didn't realize that the content that they were publishing for many years would get them in trouble, like with Google's algorithms. And we see that they completely drop off during a core update. And you review the content, and like I have like a dispensary client that comes to mind where they had a lot of content about marijuana that was like not safe. You know what I mean? Like maybe not good for kids to read or whatever. And you really have to be careful when you get into these your money, your life areas, because I do think that Google has become very strict with a lot of different topics. And you can just see this by who is ranking when you type drug keywords, when you type medical keywords, it's almost always the same set of authoritative sites. So for better or for worse, like if you want your content to rank in those areas, you should probably review what those authorities are saying and link to them, or, like it's just very hard to contradict. I hate giving this type of advice because it's like, I don't want to tell people how to run their business, but from an SEO perspective, this is actually a really big way that I think Google's changed in the last few years.
Yeah, interesting. And let's argue about something also that I saw the other day over Twitter about, let's not go crazy about this because it's very your money or your life focus right now. And then the product reviews is also very product reviews oriented because there is this obvious type of manipulation that have been going on already for a while in this sector, right? They are very risky. However, I think that it is reasonable to say that at some point, if things go as Google expect in these areas, is only reasonable that they will apply this similar type of filters to other areas and sectors too, because what Google wants is to ensure quality. Of course, here's the problem, like supply and demand, right? There's not so much quality supply in these areas, and they start applying certain filters, and there won't be any websites to rank well.
Yeah.
but if these are competitive sectors, money-making sectors anyway, when there's already a wealth of I would say, web ecosystem going on, Google can very well say, you know what, I want to make only those really authoritative websites to rank better. I will start also releasing this type of principles to everything else. So, and at the end of the day, it's also these are things that are aligned to good, let's say, like better experience from a user standpoint.
Yeah.
In any case, the content to be more comprehensive, to be more trustworthy. At the end of the day, is something that will never hurt to add to any content, right?
Yeah, I think what happened with the product reviews update is not getting enough attention from the SEO space, and that's obvious because, first of all, it only launched, I think, in the US, but they were clear that it only launched for English-speaking content. So it hasn't necessarily rolled out around the world yet. But there's a lot that happened in that update that, to your point, I think speaks volumes about what Google is trying to do. And I also think the news surrounding the product review update is relevant. So I wrote an article about this, but basically, for the past year or so, there's been a variety of different examples where the mainstream media has called out Google for having really bad affiliate content that ranks in top results for transactional keywords. So I think it was The Atlantic and a couple other big publications that were saying when I search for shoes on Google, I can never find what I'm looking for because it's either it's just people that are writing these articles where there's not a lot of evidence that they actually spent time doing reviewing the shoes or wearing the shoes or whatever. And then I went and met with a journalist who I talked to about this. She's not necessarily an SEO expert, but she was like, you SEO people are ruining everything because all these journalists are now going and writing these product review articles, and all these sites are publishing these affiliate sections and product review sections, but it's clear that people are not spending any time with the products. And in fact, apparently a lot of these journalists are going on Amazon, seeing what's trending, and then writing product review updates depending on what's trending, because that'll bring them the highest affiliate revenues. And it's no wonder Google is cracking down on this, right? So I think that's important to keep an eye on. I also think it's important what Google's doing algorithmically with these updates, because I think they're trying to algorithmically identify who has spent time with the products compared to who's just writing what everybody else wrote online. And if they're able to do that, they can extend that to a lot more content. And there's a lot of big implications there.
Yeah, 100%. It's funny that it's a journalist who has said this when the first websites developing affiliate subdomains for whatever were publications as a way to build their stream, right? It's funny, definitely. I remember a few years ago, I was participating as a speaker in an event organized by Amazon. 2 publications focus on affiliates, right? So yes, they are trying to help big websites to earn more money in some ways, but of course, you can do it well, or you can do it in a less sophisticated, not so highly qualitative way, right? So yeah, there's definitely that. But in any case, I have to say something too regarding to this shift also of visibility that Google has had with affiliate websites. Literally, I remember if you went to the SERPs 5 years ago or so, and you search for, I don't know, Nike shoes, something like that, right? Half of the results is true that were of comparisons, aggregators, review sites or listings or whatever. There were also category pages.
Yeah.
And even product pages if you also look for a model, something more specific. But now if you go and search for same queries, you will see that there are many more articles that tend to be affiliate related. Of course, the type of websites that are featuring these articles are way much more authoritative than the ones that were featuring those 5 years ago, because of what we mentioned before, publications and a lot of big websites like entering into this sector with strength. So at the end of the day, it's maybe like, maybe like content comprehensiveness in like the way that they give to certain factors related to the content. And of course, there's machine learning going on. It's obviously that people will click on this type of results rather than specific websites categories. There's a reason why these pages are there, but yes, they have been the ones also incentivizing a little bit this wave of websites at the end of the day too, because of this.
Yeah, and like the last kind of point I'll make on this that I think is really interesting to the point you just raised is that like with this recent core update, the May 2022 core update, it's been, I try to analyze core updates as much as I can. But one thing that I thought was really interesting about this update was that it looked like a lot of transactional keywords were affected in terms of like the volatility that we saw. And what was interesting was there were sites like Forbes and US News that have like not necessarily product review content, but just like these like overviews of everything you need to know about the product and like all these different modules that are like kind of objective, like an objective review of what you need to know about like insurance products, for example. And that started to rank really, really high for like insurance queries. And this is the first time we have some clients in the insurance space. This is the first time where we're seeing that type of content rank better. And it's different depending on the exact type of insurance product that you search for or the exact type of product that you're searching for. So I think this core update, Google got a lot more sophisticated about understanding intent on the individual keyword level. So, if you type men's basketball shoes or men's running shoes, you might see a different set of 8 transactional results and 2 product review results. And for this one, maybe you see 6 product review results and 4 transactional results, but it depends. That like allocation of the types of results you're seeing completely depends on the query. So it seems like Google's getting smarter about, we know people that are searching for this type of shoe want this type of content, and it's very, very granular. It's changing a lot.
Indeed, 100%. So to start wrapping up, because I recall that yes, like it's coming a little bit to an end, our little time here. I think that we can end up a little bit our conversation with something that was especially big last year, but continues to be part of the conversation and recommendations at the end of the day. And one of those metrics that Google still recommends and endorse, and we know that is only natural, right? Page experience aligns with a lot of best practices of user experience, mobile friendliness, the uses of HTTPS, core web vitals, intrusive interstitials usage, etc. Right? It's funny because every time that I enter and I talk about this with developers and clients, is like, okay, show me like a real use case and prove that improving by this the speed or getting the speed under the threshold to make it a good LCP, largest content full page, which is a metric that Google takes into consideration for speed under 2.5 seconds, will be worthy because the rankings will be better. I love the study that Systrix did a while ago. Advanced Web Ranking also did something similar that showed that it had there was a correlation of those pages that were had a better visibility index in the case of Systrix, right? In the case of Advanced Web Rankings, like those that were ranking in the top 3 positions or so had better cover vital metrics, right? But it's tricky because it's very hard to isolate. On the other hand, these are obviously type of configurations that matter beyond SEO, right?
Yeah. And, I think a good approach is it's always going to be very challenging to pinpoint the impact that core web vitals are having because it's one of millions of signals. It's a very lightweight ranking signal, all these things, but it's not debatable that it's good for users. It's good for conversions. It's good for everything. So it's like, if you can find a way to incorporate that into your marketing process, into your web development process. Like for us, we have, a web development team at our agency that understands core web vitals inside and out, and they're focused on building good core web vital metrics into the websites that we build. So I feel like it's about educating the people that are actually able to influence these metrics about the importance of it, and hopefully make it part of the process.
Part of the development of the product, right? At the end of the day, this is how SEO should be well integrated with product building too, because what you mentioned before, UX, because at what you mentioned before, of course, if these are add-ons that you need to come back and to refactor your product just because of this, of course, it's painful. But if it is part of the process that you go when you build something new, and a new interface, a new design, a new section, a new area, it's only, and at that point it won't hurt, and it won't be so difficult to really just go and ensure that huge image that you load in the header is not 2 megabytes, and you actually format it in a way that is you make the most out of CSS, and you only bring the image that is properly sized and compressed, etc., right? So it should be much more natural right there. So yes,
totally. Well, it sounds like we're reaching our closing time, so we're going to open it up to Claudio, who, by the way, Brooklyn's better than Manhattan. Just saying.
Lily.
Thank you both very much for that great conversation. We were just chatting behind the scenes. I've never been able to say that behind the scenes, but we were chatting behind the scenes. And Claudia mentioned, man, these two should go on tour together.
Oh, yeah, for
sure. And I agree. I definitely would buy tickets. That would be great to see.
SEO coffee conversations for the win.
There we go. And we can have a special adult edition in Amsterdam coffee shops. And we can do that as well.
You could fill up a stadium. You could definitely fill up a stadium.
We're building something. There's a new event coming out of SEO Day this year. But no, again, thank you both very, very much for everything you've shared. We have a couple questions that we wanted to share with you from kind of the viewers and the audience. The first one we have is interesting because I've had the chance of listening to both of you at multiple events, giving multiple talks, and I know EAT has a very special place in Lily's heart, and it's kind of her go-to topic for a lot of conversations, but I don't really recall, she's probably covered it, I just have bad memory, but what would you consider a low-hanging fruit opportunity for EAT? Like if we didn't have like a whole lot of resources, we didn't have a whole lot of things to start. I know it's not easy to think about low-hanging fruit in EAT, but maybe you can enlighten us.
Yeah, I wish there was one, but everything takes a really long time and it's very complicated. But I would say at the very least, get comfortable with identifying who the individual experts are that you can share on your site. So whether it's the people that are authors of your content, whether it's the experts that run the company, like build a branding strategy around those people, or when you Google those people, they have a really nice SERP. They have a really nice like knowledge graph ideally and all these things, because I think Google understands that the individual experts that contribute to a company help improve the expertise of the company overall. Okay,
that's a very good helpful thing. Yeah, thank you. Appreciate it, Lily.
And Lily, Aleda, always great seeing you too. One of the questions that I get a lot, not necessarily just at the new company I'm at, but at the previous company as well, is when thinking about older evergreen content, is it better to generate new content or actually optimize existing content, or would you consider it to be a case-by-case thing?
I think it really, really worthy to pay a lot of attention of how the trend changes of the rank pages for your top queries or your priority queries. So you understand whenever there's a new seasonality, when the Google actually is looking for newer type of resources, because many times you will see that you don't even need to lose rankings, but it's just click-through rate that you start perceiving that you're dropping out when people is clicking less and less on your results, even if they haven't dropped you yet, and they go to other sources. So I will say to pay really good attention on the shift on not only searches and topics. Also, you will tend to have content that will be worthy to update every year. So in my case, like my remote working website, remote work trends, every single year I know that in my editorial calendar, I need to update with the latest ones, right? And even if my content, if I only update the year, that's not worthy. The content needs to be new, right? That's definitely something important, right? So again, it's a balance. That I think is correct 100%.
Okay, great. And kind of following up on what you were mentioning just now, Aleda, what do you think is one of the most common and potentially most damaging things that kind of when content is being generated, this is where people are consistently falling short? I mean, we can definitely talk about answering the search intent with the actual content, which seems kind of common sense, but sometimes it's not as common as it may seem. What is one of those recurring kind of issues when generating content that you run into?
Two things. It's like, I see a lot of cases where the client says, I already have content for this query, but you go and take a look into the search results and there are only guides ranking for the query and they have a product page or they have a category page. No, you need to ensure that your content format and type is the one that actually Google is, well, given visibility to, because they have understood that this is what the people want, right? So even if you think that that query is commercial and you should address it with your category, your product page, sorry, but you will never be able to rank in there if you don't create the type of content that Google is like giving visibility to. So that is fundamental. Take a look at the SERPs. That is the one thing that I will say that a lot of people overlook and they should really validate. And of course, there are features to understand. Many people already have cool videos, really good images, and they don't make the most out of a lot of the SERP features there, the carousels, etc., because they don't take a look at the SERPs. Check the SERPs.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
And Aleida and Lily, 2020 was such a huge audience year for so many brands, obviously due to the pandemic. What would you say is the most significant post-COVID impact that you've seen on SEO?
Things are declining. It's like we have a lot of sites where it's like year over year is not great, and it's not because we did anything wrong, it's because there was a massive influx in SEO last year or the year before, and it's very hard to compete. So just be wary of comparing year over year right now, because there's a lot of external factors that we can't really control.
Okay, great. Well, there was an extra question that we got that I was like, well, I don't know if this is relevant or not, but specifically for Lily, do you optimize your DJ playlists for SEO?
For SEO, no, but for like effective DJing, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. Great. So thank you both again for participating, for being here, both in Spanish and in English. It's always a pleasure to speak with you and to obviously listen and learn from you. So yeah, have a great rest of your day.
And Lily, you owe me
guys.
dinner in Manhattan.
Okay, in Brooklyn.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Bye, guys.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you. So yeah, continuing, we have a few more talks. We got a few more hidden gems for you. We'll take a brief break and we'll be right back. Now moving forward, I have the great chance to present another one of my favorite tools. I think it's one of your favorite tools as well. And now we're going to present Gerald Murphy, Senior Solution Business Manager at SimilarWeb.
SimilarWeb is a tool that we use consistently to really compare competitive analysis, really get some insights into what they're doing well, what we're doing well, what we can do better. So today, Gerald will be talking about the potential of SEO in the e-commerce industry in a study made by SimilarWeb and puntorojo at the same time. So we welcome you, Gerald.
Thank you very much indeed, guys.
Thank you for being here. The floor is all yours.
Fantastic. Let's jump in, guys. Today, we're going to be talking about maximizing your potential of SEO in the e-commerce industry. As the guys have just been saying, Lily and Aleida, digital transformation is here. It's absolutely huge. What we can see from traffic levels looking over the last few years is COVID has caused digital transformation to be here. And when we're starting to look at traffic metrics, particularly year over year, we need to move away from just looking at a very small set of data. But actually, it's not always about mobile in the digital world. In search, it is. But when you start looking at things like direct traffic, so for example, going to a website like walmart.com, there's a lot more search done on desktop. And when you start looking at some old school marketing channels, like for example, email, there's a lot more activity occurring on desktop. It's not always about mobile. Search equally is not always about Google. We need to really start diversifying our search strategies. Look at Amazon, for example. You can start to see that Amazon last year, every second was generating $15,100 US every second. That's almost $40 billion a month. It's huge. we need to start looking at search engines themselves. But when we do that, we also need to understand that there's a lot of different behaviors that occur online. So for example, in Germany, on Amazon, it has the lowest bounce rate. So when we're looking at market level data, we need to also start to think about what are the behaviors at a local level, as well as approaching that and using that data within our global strategies. So search is huge. It can be incredibly complex, and even more so within the e-commerce and actually the publisher space. So let's dive in, simplifying the process along the way so that you can succeed at e-commerce. Unfortunately, today we don't have a lot of time. So what I want to do is bounce into the best pillar, because that's really, really critical for you guys in the e-commerce space. And it's actually building out an integrated search strategy. Before we jump in and show you how to do so, I want to take you through a few metrics from the SimilarWeb platform. We analysed about 20,000 keywords from each of the 3 search engines of Amazon, Google, and YouTube. We looked at the search volume trends for each of these keywords, and we analysed the overlap and the differences of the big 3, which indirectly is referring to Amazon, Google, and YouTube. What we can see is in the United States, there's a lot more interaction on Amazon versus the other 2 search engines for the top 20,000 keywords. In other words, when people come in to the United States using Amazon as a search engine, they actually look at a lot more results than what they do on YouTube and Google. So it's huge. And you can see this particularly when we look at click behavior. But interestingly, when you look at other markets like the United Kingdom on the right-hand side, there's a lot more interaction that occurs in Google in the UK versus Amazon in the United States. So global strategies really need to look at national data. So how do you build an integrated search strategy? As we've already heard, we need to make sure we're looking at EAT, expertise, authority, and trustworthiness. In other words, if you're in a brand in an e-commerce website and you're creating 5 blog posts a week because your competitor does, stop doing it. You're just actually adding to the noise. Become an expert. Think about, what do I want to become known for? How can I do things differently? That all exerts EAT. So don't just do things for the sake of doing it. Do things that are actually different and allows you to build a relationship up with your audience. Second, go in and identify who by search engine in your audience would be most applicable. As we've already heard, actually, I think Aleda mentioned, we need to start looking and analysing the search engine results page itself. Do that from today. Using this method, you can actually start to build your integrated search strategy. So on the left-hand side for the search LED lights, you'll see there's an Amazon double bubble. Basically what this means is Google thinks that this term is so commercial, it's ranking a commercial engine twice. This is quite rare this day and age because search engines are actually starting to rank a range of different content. When you start looking at things like air conditioning unit, you see a very typical Google SERP. So it has things like images, people also ask, and other SERP features. That very much indirectly applies that this is a Google strategy required. When you look at keywords like, for example, James Bond, and when you see videos that are highly prominent and dominant, that actually may be indirectly exerting, granted it's biased towards Google data, that this particular term or topic will need to have a video specific strategy. In other words, YouTube itself. And the amazing thing, when you start doing these few things, you can then slowly start to build your integrated search strategy. More on this later. Essentially, we Google to find, we Amazon to buy, and we YouTube to watch. But critically, our search behavior is hugely different. So we have on the platform a thing called on-site search data. Essentially what that means is we're able to actually find out what keywords people are using to find content by search engine. So for example, for the term air conditioning units, you can see on Google it's really broad. We're looking at things like air conditioning unit for small room. On Amazon, our search behavior is hugely different. The interface is different. Everything else is different. And as a result, our behavior is a lot more specific. We're looking for things like portable air conditioning units, quiet air conditioning units, and so on. On YouTube, we're actually thinking about, what am I going to do after I've bought this item? We're thinking about post-sales, critical for e-commerce. We're looking at things like how to wash an air conditioning unit, how to hide the unit, and so on. but each of these becomes an opportunity for a different digital asset and a different engine itself. So when it comes to Google, the foundation is EAT. It's the most advanced search engine when it comes to the algorithmic side of things. The second pillar in here is content signals. So making sure that your content is generating things like, for example, backlinks or social media shares. Whilst it's not a direct ranking factor, looking to make sure your audience is interacting with your content is critical. If it's not, stop doing what you're doing and do things differently. Sprinkle in a lot more EAT. And third and finally, in Google, it's about the brilliant basics. It's about setting that good, technical, strong, foundational level. It's also about looking at things that impact the user, like, for example, core web vitals, otherwise called page speed. On Amazon, it's about product listings. That's your EAT of Amazon. It's further behind the times when it comes to scoring content. And it's also making sure you're looking at things like you do on Google, like, for example, titles and product descriptions. And if you're reselling, don't simply copy a manufacturer description and put it on your own page. The second pillar of Amazon is around keyword relevancy. Products that you're optimizing for need to match. It's simple. And critically in here, it's also about things like user behavior. So in this case, it's about trust, customer satisfaction, and retention. You want to gain authentic reviews. This has been a massive update in the Google space, but it's going to slowly become a much bigger update in the Amazon space, where there's been a lot more old school tactics occurring as Google has been evolving itself. YouTube, on the other hand, is also about engagement. So it's about getting things like views, likes, subscribers, and comments. And critically, what that indirectly answers is this producer publishing videos that are being engaged with? Enable sharing settings as well, so people can embed your video on their website. And finally, like the other two engines, do the brilliant basics. Have things like titles, descriptions, and transcript for video, and think of the user. In this case, someone who's visually impaired, who can't view the video themselves, in which case they'll want to actually read it through, for example, a screen reader. The most fundamental thing you can do in e-commerce is to get into the mindset of the buyer's journey. Years ago, when I started to analyze this from an information retrieval perspective, people were talking about informational, navigational, transactional. They're really old school ways of looking at search. Fundamentally, we search for one of four ways: awareness, consideration, decision, and inspiration. I'll take you through that shortly. Essentially, when you get into this mindset, you can also start to align with the search engine strategy. So when it comes to awareness, Google is your go-to search engine. We tend to go to it and ask a question, almost like a friend. Whereas when it comes to things like decision, about buying an e-commerce product, Amazon is the go-to search engine. So identify your search engine, look and know the similarities of EAT, having a keyword strategy, and core focus areas, and really start thinking about building up your strategy. But search behavior is incredibly complex and further complicates things. So online, we have, broadly speaking, 6 different types of behaviors. Every search, for example, has to end. This is why user behavior isn't a ranking factor. Just because I'm in a coffee shop, my coffee arrives and I end my search, doesn't mean it was a bad search, doesn't mean it was a poor page speed. Those things, it just has to end. We're human beings at the end of the day. Equally, in the industry, we often talk about pogo stick and that it just occurs on the SERP. It actually occurs on an engine itself. For example, Amazon, we pogo stick using different filters. So we have these really incredibly complex behaviors. So look at some complex data. In the world of SimilarWeb, we have zero click because we have a contributory network. We're looking at real anonymized user behavior data. Don't just look and say, I want to rank for duvets. 88% of people who do a search for the word duvet click on nothing. Looking at search volume as a metric alone is incredibly weak. Build your integrated search strategy based on keyword awareness. So let's just say we worked for a confectionery shop. Paper as a term would be an awareness term. The searcher doesn't know what they want. Is it a newspaper? Is it actually paper for a wall? In which case, wallpaper. They're unsure of what they want. Something like printer paper is a consideration keyword because they're further down that funnel. They're more likely to know what they're looking for and therefore more likely to engage with the content that they find. Things like A4 printer paper is around things like decision terms. This person knows they have a printer, they've ran out of paper, they know the size of the paper, therefore their intent is much higher. That's why it's called decision. And finally, you've got inspirational, which is, for example, doing outside the box thinking, like how to make an airplane out of printer paper. And what you'll start to notice is when you start looking at each search engine, the amount of results that are actually ranked. And when you start to manually map these up with each of the stages of the buyer's journey, Amazon is mostly around consideration terms when it comes to duvet covers with a small set of branded terms. Google, a little bit more diverse because it has things like awareness in here. YouTube is actually the most diverse engine when it comes to duvet cover terms because it has all 4 stages of the buyer's journey plus branded. So summary of how to build an integrated search strategy, making sure we're being engine-led. We don't just have a search strategy. We have a Google strategy. We have an Amazon strategy. We have a YouTube strategy. In other parts of the world, you actually have a Yahoo strategy for Japan. As we saw in one of the first slides, Japan is a highly engaged audience, particularly on Amazon. In fact, it's one of the most biggest audiences in terms of viewing multiple pages in a session. Have a content-led strategy, making sure all of our content is EAT. So you're not just doing things for the sake of rules, you're doing it because it's different and it's good. And third and finally, have a user-led strategy. And the easiest way to do this is to do this by the buyer's journey and keyword intent. So looking at keywords that have awareness, consideration, decision, and inspiration behind them. And if you're strapped for time, particularly in the e-commerce space, do this for your largest business unit or line of business. It's the most easiest way to get the business thinking differently. Thank you very much for everyone's time.
Thank you very much, Gerald.
You're welcome.
Very, very much. It was a lot of information. It was great insights. And I think we have a lot of information for benchmarking as well. So I think that's really interesting to hear. So we have a few more talks left. The day's not over yet. We're going to go for a brief pause and we'll be right back.
Every business starts small, really small, and it can grow fast. Every business has a story. Sometimes it's a messy story, really messy. Every business takes courage to persevere and overcome challenges. And every business can grow with SEMrush. Make it big with digital marketing tools from SEMrush.
Welcome back. So we are getting to the end of this event, right?
Almost there.
It happened so fast, don't you think?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. So we only have 3 more talks this afternoon, and this one's a little close to my heart because it's someone that I actually worked with. And I'm going to introduce Maria Sanchez-Diaz from the New York Times to talk about how to implement digital change in newsrooms. I actually met Maria about 4 or 5 years ago in Puerto Rico at an SEO conference, and we were able to connect there. And we've been talking SEO since then, and she's just made a lot of waves in the space.
Yeah, no, and she's also covering a super important topic for the media industry. And just to give a little background on Maria, Maria's been the senior editor, digital storytelling and training at the New York Times for over a year. And before that, she worked at 2.5 years at the Washington Post as a senior editor. So welcome, Maria. It's really nice to have you here. I think you might be muted.
Now?
Yes, perfect.
We can hear you perfect now.
Okay, sorry about that.
No worries.
We're still muted. Everyone, thank you for having me. My name is Maria Sanchez. Can you see my presentation well?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. So as you guys were saying, I'm a senior editor for digital storytelling at the New York Times. My work is about implementing change in the newsroom, and that can take many forms. It can be introducing a new workflow into a certain section, train teams on how to use a new tool, teach editors and reporters how to live blog a news event, guiding teams that want to diversify storytelling formats to engage the relationship with the audience. So my experience is all about change, and this presentation I'm going to tell you about some of the principles and strategies that have helped me to be more successful at that. Okay, the first thing is experimentation, no? To be able to drive digital change in newsrooms, and as my colleague here was saying at the Washington Post, I work in the audience team, and a lot of my work was around optimizing stories for web, search, mobile, social, and be more competitive in search. So this applies also to that world and that type of change. You need to have a bias towards section and experimentation, no? Something that I have borrowed from the design thinking discipline that came out from the Stanford University is this idea of testing out small things, no? Or as we call them, tiny experiments that can be under your control, that can lead to big changes, no? Particularly in newsrooms. No cultural change starts big, starts by experimenting with small things, no? So